Hey there, guys. Welcome to a brand new episode of Flying Chariots The Rise. Tonight's guest is a true connoisseur of the mysterious and supernatural, Joe Shortridge. As a host of his show, the 222 Paranormal Podcast, Joe, along with his sister Jen, has explored the depth of the paranormal in over 390 episodes, sharing personal experiences, the latest paranormal news, and interesting conversations with special guests. But Joe's expertise goes beyond the supernatural. He's not just a ghost story expert, but a man of numerous encounters. From shared death experiences to shadow figures, poltergeist activity, and beyond. His curiosity also extends to the spheres of Native American burial mounds, giants, Bigfoot, UFOs, and the mystifying connection between them. Joe's expertise has earned him invitations to perform at prestigious shows such as Peer Beyond the Veil, Grand Rapids Ghost Hunters, Ghost Biker Garage, Boo Productions, and many more. So bear with us, guys, for an episode of enlightenment, enigma, and perhaps a spectral tale or two. Welcome, you curious minds out there. My guest tonight is Joe Shortridge, host of the 222 Paranormal Podcast. And what else he's into, he will tell us in a minute. Joe, thank you so much for being my guest tonight.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor.
So, like I said, you're the host of the 222 Paranormal Podcast. Tell us more about your podcast at first.
Yeah, me and my sister run the 222 Paranormal Podcast. We've been on the air for about 8 years now. We have somewhere around 350 shows or 360 shows, somewhere around there. I'm not positive, but we were sitting around one day at the house, and she looked at me. She says, "Let's start a podcast." I'm like, "Okay." We were both into different things. I was into like UFOs and stuff like that, and she was into the paranormal. And she did a few ghost hunts with the crew from Ghost Adventures, the TV show, way back before they were really popular. They were here in Ohio at the Ohio State Reformatory, and she went with them for that. And she had a good time. And I didn't go. I wasn't really into ghost hunting at the time. I was more into like UFOs and stuff like that. But then time went on, and I had an episode where my best friend passed away. And when she passed away, I had a shared death experience with her. And that kind of made me think of what goes on after we die. And it just got me snowballed into this where I'm now fully immersed in it. And we have a show every week. We interview people, but we also do our own shows. But we travel all over the country doing this. We love it, and it gives us an opportunity to go places we never have a chance to, and see things and meet people like yourself that are in the paranormal field. And one of the things that we do also is we go to a lot of conventions. So we take our equipment to the conventions and we record at the conventions. We record interviews there, which gives us the opportunity also to meet up with a lot more people that we wouldn't have met up with before, celebrities, stuff like that. And we just look and say, "Hey, you want to be on the show?" And they're like, "Okay." So we do an impromptu interview right there on the spot. And that's kind of the premise of the show. But we also have our studio here, and we do recordings in the studio also. My best friend Jackie was sick. She had a double lung transplant. And 5 years after, I got a phone call saying that she was on life support. And long story short, I drove the 2 hours to see her because they said they were going to disconnect all the equipment from her. And about halfway there, I had what I feel is a shared death experience from her, to where I felt what she felt when they disconnected all the equipment.
Wow. So
Yeah.
You had a special connection.
Yeah, we were really close. I mean, we weren't lovers or nothing like that. We were just best friends. And sometimes I say we had a psychic connection because I would pick up the phone to call her. It'll be busy because she's trying to call me. Stuff like that happened all the time. Um, when she did pass, I got the phone call from her sister, and they said, she's in the hospital. The last I heard from her, she messaged me the day before and said, "Oh, Cleveland in the morning," because she had to go for these tests that she does every year. And what happens is they'll actually take a tube and put it down into her lungs, put some fluid in, draw the fluid out to test it to see if she is, getting an infection or anything. So that's all I heard. The next day, I get a call saying that she's on life support and they don't think she's going to make it through the night. So I drove out there. It's a 2-hour drive from my house to Cleveland. I drove out there and saw her. And the end of the night, everybody's just standing around in the hospital room. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go because I got to work in the morning. Because it's like, I don't know what I was thinking. I'm like, I got to go to work. So I went to work the next day and I get a phone call and they said, well, we're going to disconnect life support in a half hour. And I'm like, all right. So I knew that I wouldn't make it back there. So I left, went home, took a shower, then headed out to the hospital, knowing that I wasn't going to make it there in time. So it's 2-hour drive, about an hour into the drive, and I'm driving there. I'm a wreck. I shouldn't have been driving, and I was a mess. And I've never cried, but I was pretty close because it's my best friend. And I'm driving there, and about an hour into the drive, all of a sudden I felt a thing where, can you imagine taking a stove and the heating element inside of a stove, holding that above your body and just like taking it from your head down through your body, out your fingers, the heat line that you would feel, that's what I felt. And the heat was going through my body and out my fingertips. And just after that, I felt the exact same way I do now. It was almost like a miraculous healing, I guess. I don't know what to call it. But I went from being just a blubbering idiot to how I am now. So I get to the hospital and I see her husband there and I'm like, hey man, what's going on? And he's like, well, they disconnected the life support about an hour ago and they don't understand, but she hasn't passed yet. And he's like, do you want to go in and see her? I'm like, yeah, heck yeah. So I walk into her room and there she is laying there, and and the only thing that's running is heart monitor. And I walk over and I pick up her hand, and just as I touched her hand, the machine started beeping. And I'm like, oh crap, I stepped on a hose or something. And the nurse came in and said, no, she just passed. So a lot of people say, well, she waited for me.
Oh,
yeah. So I didn't, I thought a lot of it then, but I didn't think much of it then. But that night, after all that, I went home and I had my first dream of her. And since then, I've had a lot of dreams and a lot of things happen that showed me that she is, consciously connecting with me in the afterlife. The first night I had a dream, and in the dream, I see her and I look at her and said, the last time I saw you, you were dead, real. I mean, I sound like a jerk saying it to her, but that's the way we were, we joke around with each other. And since then, I've had a lot of communication with her. One of the other things that happens is she used to play REO Speedwagon, the CD High Infidelity. She ruined the CD. She ruined the cassette. She ruined the album by playing it so much. And it just drove me nuts. Well, a lot of things that happen is like the morning after they transferred her body back home here, and we were all going to meet at her mom's house. I get in my car, I turn on the car, and a Detroit radio station. Now, Detroit's about an hour north of where I'm now. Detroit radio station was on the radio, and that song, I can't remember the name of it, but it's Heard It From a Friend Who Heard It From a Friend, REO Speedwagon song came on the radio. And I'm like, this is weird. But since then, that has happened many, many times. I've had many dreams about her, and I'm slowly writing a book about this. I need to get off my butt and actually write more, but that's short story long. That's what got me into the paranormal, is my experience I had with her and wanting to know more about, the afterlife.
So you're writing a book about her and your experiences with her.
Yeah, the experience I had, and since then the things that happened, and even just recently I was at a bar. We all met at this bar for Christmas, and it's sort of like a friends meeting, and our friend Sarah was there, and she does a lot of ghost hunting with this and that, and she just started talking about the same old stuff over and over, and I'm sitting at the bar, and I don't drink, but I went there to the bar, for everybody to meet up. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking in my head, I've got to get out of here. It's the same old thing over and over. I just got to get out of here. And just as I thought that, the jukebox, which hasn't played all night, popped on with REO Speedwagon. And the song is like, if you're tired of the same old story, just I'm like, okay, I'm out of here. Thanks, Jackie. Tell me to get the hell out of the bar.
Let's make a big step back. When you were very young and when you grew up with your family, what was your perception back then of the paranormal?
Like I said, I wasn't really that much into the paranormal aspect of it, or well, I shouldn't say just the paranormal, because the paranormal encompasses everything from UFO to Bigfoot to everything. But I was more into like aliens and UFOs and stuff like that. Because my dad, he had a UFO experience. I don't know much about it, but he just kept saying, yeah, I saw a UFO so many years ago. And I was always into space. I, own telescopes, all that kind of stuff. So that was my thing. Little bit about Bigfoot, but not really into it. Back then I was more into drinking and, partying with friends and all that. But, as I got older and different things, I've learned more. And I guess as we get older, we get more curious about the afterlife because, we're getting closer. And I have had a couple situations in my life where I should have made it out of. I was in an ATC wreck where I fell in. Went over a bridge that wasn't there, and they said I should have passed away then, but I didn't. I made it through. Just recently, I had a major stroke that set me back, and basically, I'm pretty much perfectly fine now. But there's different times in my life that they said, well, you should have checked out. But I think that with my sister getting into ghost hunting and then this happening with Jackie, I think that's when it really, switched to where I wanted to learn more about this.
Yeah.
And that was about 8 years ago.
I was the same. When I was just a young boy, I was interested in all that stuff, in UFOs and aliens, but on another level. We've seen, I'm 43 now, so I was born 1980. When I was 6 or 8 or 10, it was 90s or even before the 90s. And you've seen TV show with aliens, maybe an old Attack from Mars or something like that, movies like that. And you were curious, because of the movies, and you had a completely different perception and all these things as I have now.
Yeah.
Like you said, when we get older, we have another perception on all the things, and our interest shifts from just being curious to really want to explore all these things. So I have a good friend of mine. He's 70 plus now. When his wife had a strange feeling in her mind, and she said, now our daughter is having her baby, and her daughter was far away. I think she was in England, and they were in Germany here. And the wife said, now the baby is coming. I feel it. And maybe an hour or so later, the telephone rang and the baby was there. So
Yeah.
Crazy. Some people have a crazy connection. Do you ever wonder why people have a connection like that?
Yeah. It's so strange because, like that. And since I've been studying up on shared death experiences, people have, in completely different countries have felt the same way. Like, I got to call Aunt Thelma or whoever because I feel that something happened, and it's almost like the twin flame thing too, where twins can feel pain or that. And even with Jackie, when we were kids, if she would get hurt, I would know. So I don't know. That's one of the mysteries that we deal with in the paranormal. And I always say the more we learn, the less we know, because there's so much involved in this. But what I think, we're all energy, and we still honestly don't know where consciousness comes from. We don't know where consciousness is in the body because, like, even memory. I remember reading a study on where they studied this mouse, and they did the maze thing, and they started cutting out its brain, trying to find out where memories really are. And they got down to the point where the mouse could barely walk because they took so much of the brain away, but yet it remembered. And I've heard stories of people that get, like transplants and have memories of the person that had the organ before. So I really don't know where this consciousness transfer comes from. Now, like I said, we know that we're all made of energy. We believe that ghosts are just pure energy. And maybe that energy is powerful enough or whatever to transfer so far into someone else's consciousness to where they pick this up.
Yeah.
And, I that's one thing that we're still studying. It's going to be a long time before we realize where this transfer of consciousness comes from, because some people believe that our brains are just receivers, and others believe that consciousness is put out by us. Now, in my other life, I'm a life coach and a financial coach. So I study a lot of that too. And one of my big things is the law of attraction. And this kind of goes with it because they have found that they made a device that they put on someone's head, and it registers the brain waves. And we've all seen it where, you can be put in a machine and they can read your brain waves while you sleep and all that, but they actually have a device that's not connected to the head at all. They could see the brain waves, even though it's outside the physical body, which shows me that the energy is coming out. And when we say, put out into the energy, put out into the universe, what kind of energy you want to get back, that's a true thing, to where your body is actually putting out radio waves, or whatever you want to call it, into the universe.
Hmm.
So how do we know, or, we may not even know that these signals that we're getting from other people, and some people say it's our guardian angels telling us that or whatever. How do we know that frequency is just being sent to us for some reason? Like a radio station would be sent out, and we're just receiving that. And like I say, the more we learn about this stuff, the less we actually know. And we won't know till we're on the other side.
Absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
I really do think that our brain, or we ourselves, or whatever, maybe our blood system, is just a receiver for the consciousness. I really do think it's located somewhere else in the universe, wherever. And I believe in a collective consciousness also.
All over the world, all over time. People have been looking at their gods, doesn't matter what religion you believe in, but there's always something that people are believing in, and it's always a higher power. It always has control over us. We do have our own thoughts, but you know what I mean? It's people have always studied this from as far back in time as we can tell. So there's something out there, whether you call it God, whether you call it the universe, the ether, whatever, there's something out there that is beyond our thoughts and beyond our capabilities to actually comprehend it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a very interesting topic, and we have a lot to learn still.
Yeah.
In your credentials, I could read that you had encounters with shadow figures. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's happened a few times. Different places that we've investigated. Like I say, we've been all over the country doing this. We've been out to Jerome, Arizona, which is about 1,500 miles west of where we are. Um, but here in Toledo, there's a place called the Collingwood Arts Center. And what this is a mansion that a gentleman bought and started building, and he ran out of money. So he ended up selling the property to um, these nuns, or this church of nuns or whatever, and they were going to make it into a convent. So if you look this up, it's called the Collingwood Arts Center, and I'll send you a picture so that you can put it in the show. But the front of it's just a mansion, and then it's this huge building behind it. And we were in the basement, and there's a room down there that we call the death room. And the reason we call it that is it's a spot under the stairs where over the years during the winter, if a nun would pass, they wouldn't be able to bury her right away. So they would keep her in this room until the summer when they could actually bury her, because back then they didn't have the big equipment that we have now. And we called that the death room because that's basically where they stored them. And we're in that room, and we get a lot of activity in that room. And like I say, it's just a small little space under the steps. We were in there, and we saw shadow figures right outside the door that would morph itself into like a dog and actually walk on the ceiling, all kinds of stuff. So that's one of the big things that I see. Now, in the studio here, the studio is in the back of my house. I have my art gallery, which is just out on the other side of the camera, and then the hallway, which goes out to the living room and my bedroom and stuff, which that plays a role in what I've seen also that I'll tell you about. But I was in my bed one night, and I woke up, and I was laying there. I looked up, and there's like this 7-foot shadow figure with one hand on the bed and his whole body like leaning over me, just looking at me. So I laid there for a second, and it vanished. And then I spent the next 2 hours or so laying in bed going, okay, now what light is coming in, what shadow, trying to picture what it is in my mind. And I haven't figured out what would cause a shadow like that. So maybe it was a shadow figure leaning over my bed. I don't know, but it was a very distinct thing. And same thing I saw at the Collingwood and at different locations I've seen shadow figures. It was the same thing where it was a shadow, yeah, but you can't see through it. It's almost like a solid shadow standing in front of you. So I don't know. And then there was another night where I woke up and I looked across my room and actually saw a red shadow figure standing in my room, which I've never heard of. In all my years, I've never heard of a red shadow figure, but I saw it. And same thing with that. The minute I realized it was there, it vanished. And then I'm like, okay, what the heck can make that? In my mind, I'm like, you got to figure out what would cause something like that, whether a light coming in the window or whatever. But to this day, I couldn't figure it out. So that made me think about shadow figures too, because, we've seen them at the different locations we go to, and they're always like out of your peripheral vision. They're always off to the side or that. Now, the one that I woke up to was literally standing over me, but most of them are just gleaming flints where you look around the door and you see something. Or same thing at the Collingwood Arts Center. There's a hallway where the nuns used to actually live. We call them the cells because they're basically just a room big enough to put a bed in. And I mean, they weren't cells where they were locked in or nothing, but they were small rooms, and we call them the cells. And up in that hallway is another place where we see shadows coming out of the rooms. If you sit there, you can see shadows going back and forth through the door. So, it makes me think, what are shadow figures? Some people believe that they may be alien and they're just looking around corners, or maybe they are spirits that we're not supposed to see, and their energy is just basically sucking the energy out of that space that they're in, and that's why it becomes a shadow. We don't know. But I've had a lot of experiences with what they call shadow figures, at the different locations that I've been to. So but I tell you, the night that I woke up and I'm laying in bed and I look up and see this thing, it lasted about 10 seconds and it just vanished. And I swear I saw one hand on the bed and the other just leaning over me. So I don't know what that was.
Huh. Is there a noticeable pattern when it comes to these shadow figures?
Not really in my mind. I mean, basically, it's still the same thing where they're the shape of a body, except, like I've seen in the Collingwood Arts Center where they would actually morph into a different shape, sometimes just a blob. And I'm not talking where they sit there and you see them morph and all. These are quick glances, but they're quick enough or slow enough that you can recognize that it is something. But like I say, we don't know why they're there. We don't know what shadow figures actually are, because people see them all the time, but yet it's not as prominent. Now, I know I keep going back to it, but the one I saw in my bedroom was very prominent. I could tell it was the shape of a person. He was very tall. I could see the hand on the bed and I could see it leaning over me and I couldn't see through it. It was a solid shadow. But 90% of the time, it's just, out of the peripheral vision. And I have other theories about that too, where, our bodies, our minds are deletion characters. There's a thing in your mind or in your brain called the activated reticulating system. And what that does is you see stuff all around you all the time. Like in your studio right now, you have the heater going. You have things outside. You have all this stuff making noise and the articulative reactive system takes all the information into your brain, but it deletes 90% of it, because if you heard every single thing that you heard or see everything you see, you would go insane, but that part's saying this is important. You want to pay attention to this. And it's sort of like when you buy a new car, all of a sudden you see the same car all over the place. Well, those cars have always been there, but your brain says that's not important. You're not paying attention to it. And I think with shadow figures, I think it's something to do with that, because whatever you're looking at straight ahead, you're going to see. Whatever's off to the side, you may not see it. And maybe by us seeing those out of the corners of our eyes, it's just, we see it, but our brain's going, nope, you don't see that,
Very interesting. But with these shadow figures, there's never a communication, right?
No, not that I know. Nothing I've never communicated with any of them. I've seen them, but yeah, there's no communication. And like I say, most of the people, when they see them, it's either going across the doorway or they see something poking around the wall, kind of like a little person looking around the wall. So I don't know. Maybe they are spirits that are just curious, and that's a type of spirit they are. I don't know.
What do you think the different color meant? Because usually they're dark or black, but now you've seen a red one. What do you think?
I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know. It's just, I've never heard anybody talking about a red shadow figure, but I woke up and saw one in my room. And, like I said, I laid there and I was thinking, okay, what would cause this? Because I do have 2 windows in my bedroom. And, maybe there was a fire truck outside with a red flashing light or something. I don't know. But I laid there and tried to figure it out. And to this day, I can't figure it out.
Have you suffered from sleep paralysis in your past, maybe as a young boy?
No, not that I know of.
No.
Yeah,
I have, and I had crazy hallucinations of faces morphing into each other, stuff like that, and they have been red. Those weren't shadow figures. I'm just asking because sometimes people that I've talked to in the past that had paranormal encounters, sometimes, or let's say often, suffered also from sleep paralysis when they were very young still. So Your interest extends to Native American burial mounds, which is very interesting. Also giants, Bigfoot, UFOs. What's so interesting about these Native American burial mounds?
Yeah. I know that my ancestors are Native American. With the last name is Shortridge. I've been researching a lot of it as Native American, and my grandmother was pure. I forget what tribe she was with, but she was Native American. So that's one thing that I've always been interested in. And I started researching about the mounds because there are mounds around where I live. Here in Toledo, there were two mounds downtown. One was on one side of the river and one was on the other. And, doing the podcast, as you know, we're learning so many things because we have different shows every week. And I started learning about the Native Americans and the giants, and it just started to pile onto each other, I guess you say. And my good friend lived in Newark, Ohio, which is 3 hours south of me. And where she lived was in Newark Earthworks. And I mentioned to her about, hey, I love history. I love that. And she's like, well, what about the mounds? I'm like, what do you mean? And she started explaining to me about the Newark Earthworks. And I was like, I want to learn more, So since then, I've been learning a lot about them. And, like here in Ohio, there was over 10,000 mounds that most of them were just destroyed by farmers and different, people building houses and stuff. But here in Toledo, there's a couple locations. Like I said, downtown has two mounds that were there. One now is a restaurant that's not there. It's closed up, but the restaurant's still there. And then across is where the grain silos are, was another mound that they tore down. But what's interesting is one of the most haunted locations that we go to is called the Oliver House. That's downtown Toledo. And now it's a brewery and a restaurant, but it was a hotel. And there was always stories of hauntings at this location. Well, the thing is, not even 50 feet from this place is where that original mound was. And when they tore the mound down to build the bridge that we call the high level, they plowed it down and they pushed the mound over to where the restaurant is now, the Oliver House. And some of the most haunted locations is right in that area that I've been to, the Oliver House being one of them. Interesting thing was there's a story that back in 1984 or 85, when they were rebuilding the parking lot, they started finding bones. And, the story goes is that they didn't want to let anybody know because then they would have to have the archaeologists come in and dig and all that. So they ended up just paving over it. So to this day, underneath the parking lot are bones. Well, they tore the mound down. And what I think happened was when they bulldozed, they pushed all the bones from the mound over into this area. And as you know of Native American burials, once you disturb that, the hauntings start.
Yeah.
And throughout the years, this Oliver House has been very haunted. We were doing an event there, and back when it was a hotel, the lobby area is now like a meeting room, but there's a big safe in that building. So the safe is still there, but they're using it as a closet now. But it's interesting to see that big door still there. And we were doing an event there, and we're all sitting there, and all of a sudden this door just opened by itself. And this thing probably weighs 2,000 pounds. And we're all just sitting there like, okay, that door just opened. So that was really the only thing that I've ever had happen to me there. But there's been a lot of stories about that location being haunted. And I believe that because it was next to a mound, it's haunted. Now, down the street, about, I'd say, a mile, there's a location that we call the Bone House. And the reason we call it the Bone House is because this gentleman bought the house to rebuild, And when he started rebuilding it, he started pulling boards away from the walls and bones would fall out. And he's like, okay, this is weird. So as he was working on the house, it came to every board that he pulled up from the floor or the walls had bones behind them. So he called in the team Haunted Toledo, who I work with. I'm not part of Haunted Toledo, but I do a lot of stuff with them. And Haunted Toledo is a ghost hunting team that's more about the history. They're historians. They document the history and the hauntings. They were called in to do an investigation. And when they did their investigations, the stuff hit the fan. There was so much activity out of this place. They were there one night, and a board was ripped off the wall and thrown across the room. The first night that they did an investigation, someone was murdered out front. There was actually a shooting and someone was killed out front.
In front of the house?
Yes.
Oh, damn.
The news actually came in and did a little story about the house. It's Channel 24 News out of Toledo, if anybody wants to look it up. But it's called The Bone House. They did a story, and why would they were there? They did show them the bones and that. And the coroner came in, and the coroner said that they were mainly animal bones, but there were some bones they couldn't identify, and they think that they were animal and chicken and stuff like that. But I've seen some of these bones, and they're big. The one night I was there, and I was like, come on, are you serious? Every floorboard and he's like, no, I'm serious. And the owner actually took a hammer, pulled up a floorboard right there in front of me. And I looked down, and there was a carving, a little bone with a face carved in it. And I'm like, this is weird. So he showed me that, yeah, there's bones underneath this, underneath every floorboard. The house is full of them.
Wow. Even if those are animal bones, for the most part, they also could have been used in rituals or could be sacrifice things. Very interesting, very spooky. And it reminds me.
We found out that the house was one of the main locations for a religion called Santeria. And I guess in this religion, they do sacrifice and they do other rituals, because there were things found in the walls like hairbrushes, clothing. There was notes found. There was one little corner back in the wall that they found a bunch of love notes. And upstairs, where a lot of the activity happened, the stairway is real steep. So the second half of the building is just the attic, and the stairway is real steep. And at the top of the stairway, there's a table, and there were a lot of cut marks in that table. So we feel that that's where a lot of this stuff happened. And it's not devil worship or nothing like that, but it's just their religion, and that's what they did. And I guess to get they just put the bones in the walls. And after so many years, it filled up. Well, the building is still there. You can look it up on Google Maps. It's still there. It's a nice little house, but the owner was so entranced, I want to say, about this house is he would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, not even get dressed, just get out of bed, drive there, and start digging the floors up. So now, the last time that I was in there, I walked in and there was no floors. It was just rafters. And then you could see under the floor where the dirt, where he was digging it up. And I guess he lost the house, which is a shame. It sold for auction because of taxes or something. And it's like, I think it sold for like $1,500 to pay the taxes. And I'm like, oh man, why didn't I buy it? But yeah, it's still standing. It's still there, but nothing's really happening there. Nobody's living there. But the problem is, if you were to buy it, the outside looks fine, but there's nothing on the inside. No floors, anything anymore. It's just gutted.
That reminds me of the story of this movie called Poltergeist, which the house was also on a Native American burial mound. And yeah, then the haunting started.
I go to a lot of the mounds now because I'm really interested in it. And a lot of the places that we've investigated, such as um, West Virginia State Penitentiary, we did an investigation there, and that's called Moundsville because right literally across the street is a mound in West Virginia, and that's super haunted. And I find that a lot of the places that have burial mounds near them are haunted. And I just think it might not be like a demons or nothing like that. I just feel that it's the energy of the souls that are in those mounds because we know that the Native Americans were very entrenched in beliefs of the spirits and the earth energies and stuff like that. So that's why I think a lot of these places at mounds are haunted. And it's not a negative thing. You know, a lot of people always go back to it's demons or not, but that's such a small aspect of the paranormal.
You're
It's
right.
it's just spirit energy.
Yeah, you're right. Since you mentioned those animal bones, here in Germany, here there was a tradition way back in time, speaking about 1600s, 1700s, when people back then built a house, they sacrificed cats and dogs. But those were the sacrifices for the spirits of the house, so that your house wouldn't burn down or.
And I mean, they also like the clothing they found in the walls, and that was a common thing too, like in England and places where they'll put boots in a wall or they'll put something in the walls, I guess as a sacrifice or whatever, whether it's clothing or whatever. But like the animals, the reason they did that is if there's going to be a haunting at that house, it's usually the first thing that passes away in that house.
Mhm.
That's their beliefs. And they would rather have an animal than a human,
Gotcha.
being such an old house. I mean, I look back at my childhood in our house and it wasn't old or nothing. My dad built the house and it was like a new subdivision back then. But growing up, there was in the house in the upstairs, there were these little doors that opened up to like a little attic area. It was an area that they couldn't really build anything in. So they just put the door in so that you can get in there to insulate or whatever. And that was our place that it was like our little secret hiding place. And I was over there at Ma's house a few weeks ago upstairs, and they're not using the upstairs anymore because we all moved out. But I went in there and I'm walking around going, yeah, that little door right there. That's where I used to hang out. I would put stuff in there and I'd fix up that little room, the lights and posters on the walls and all that. So I went in there and yeah, there's still things from all of our kids, like in the rafters because it would fall down and that. And I found that interesting because we go in these old places and some people would, I mean, I'm not talking like bones, but you would find things on the walls and it's history. You can actually pull that stuff out and go, that kid lived here and played with this toy or whatever. But, lots of times, like we said, when they're building houses, they'll put stuff in the walls to bless or whatever the house.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine and myself, we went on a lost place tour and we found this very old house in the woods. And nobody was there anymore, of course. Doors were open, windows were broken. And we went inside, and somehow everything was still there. And everything, the bed, the sheets on the bed, and the living room. You could see that people have been in there before and destroyed a few things, but besides that, it looked awesome. And I would say people left in the 80s, in the early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and they left everything behind. I was wondering what the hell? Everything is still clothes hanging on the walls and jackets, shoes were standing there. The living room, the furniture, everything was there. The bed, the sheets on the bed. Um, what happened to these people? Maybe they had to go to the hospital, or some old woman or man was alone and had to go to the hospital, died there and had no relatives. And I don't know, crazy.
Yeah.
Um, we found crazy stuff in our glasses, uh, wristwatches, pictures, newspapers. The whole life was still there, and it was so interesting to go through these things. And we left everything. I took nothing with me. Um, I don't think that's a good idea, but yeah, it was very, very interesting. Yeah, it's it's a it's a complete history. Was
Yeah,
in front of us. It was so interesting.
it's so bizarre to find. I mean, like you said, they just walked out,
Yeah,
and it's like none of the relatives came and cleaned up. Nothing. It's just the house just sits at, and that's just one of them mysteries. It's like, were they abducted, or what? But that just blows my mind, and that's one good thing about what we do, and obviously you do too. But what we do is it allows us to get into places like that. I've spent the night in prisons. I've spent the night in insane asylums. And places that normal normally we wouldn't be able to get into. But being that we're ghost hunting, or like I said, things with haunted Toledo, documenting history, it gets us the opportunity to go to these places. I mean, there's a church downtown called St. Pat's, and it's like a cathedral style. And we, during Haunted Toledo, they did a film about it. So we did an investigation there one night, and I get there, and it's, part of our family history on my mom's side. They actually helped build the church, and they were people that went to the church. So there's pictures of my ancestors on the walls and stuff. And this place is amazing. There's history everywhere. They have two areas. One on the side of the church is for the fire department, the other's for the police, and they have masses there for them and that. I get there, and the priest is like, well, just shut this door when you leave. And I'm like, we're here by ourselves in this church where it's full of history. It's full of gold stuff. It's like, this guy trusts us enough just to walk out and say, just lock up when you leave, but that's, like I said, the field that we're in allows us to go into places like that and see the history and spend time there. It's like you said, you were out doing other things, but you found that building, and just, I could just sit there for hours and just imagine, what the family did. Why did they leave? All that stuff.
interesting. You said you've been to a prison. Have you been there for a paranormal investigation, or was it a lost place?
Oh yeah, we've investigated different prisons. Um, we have one here called Ohio State Reformatory, which is, these are all closed. They're not still in active prison, but Ohio State Reformatory, Moundsville, which is Virginia State Penitentiary. I just went down to Huntsville, Tennessee, and went into the old Scott County Jail. Spent some time there. Got some great evidence there. Um, the different asylums we've been into. There's like 4 of them that we've been to, and we spend the night there doing these investigations, which is perfect because, a lot of people say, well, why do you investigate at night? Well, you can investigate during the day, but the noise levels are higher. The outside noise is higher. We like doing investigations at night because everything's quieter, and, being dark, it does add a little bit to the mystery of it and the excitement. But yeah, I've spent the night in different jails. It's funny because, people are like, what are you doing this weekend? So I'm going to jail,
Yeah, I've spent the night in jail too, but not for research, man. I tell you that. You're also interested in Bigfoot and UFOs. I like that a lot. It's UFOs, man. Don't get me started on UFOs, but I think you can name Bigfoot and UFOs in the same context because people always see Bigfoots and UFOs at the same time. Have you experienced with that kind of stuff too?
We call this the paranormal, and it all mixes together because I've talked to so many people that have had, I haven't had one myself, but I've talked to a lot of people that had Bigfoot encounters, and next thing they know, they're seeing UFOs. They're seeing lights in the woods. They're seeing, like poltergeist activity in their homes. So I don't know. It all comes together. The paranormal all mixes together. And like I said, I've never had a Bigfoot encounter. I have seen what they call orbs. You know, I was at the Collingwood Arts Center one night, and it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and we were the only people in the building. And I was sitting in the main auditorium, just watching lights float across the stage, you know, visible orbs. But Bigfoot, there are stories where, like, remember this one story, this lady was driving down the road, and all of a sudden this blue light went across her on the road, and she slammed on the brakes. And next thing she knows, she sees a Bigfoot run out. So was Bigfoot chasing the light, or was the light chasing the Bigfoot? We don't know. But I've seen, or I've talked to people that had encounters where they've had Bigfoot encounters, then other strange things happen.
Are you aware of the Betty and Barney Hill UFO case?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I heard of it, yeah, right. And there's this German researcher here, and he recently, might not be recently, but I remember this article I read from him. And he said that Betty and Barney Hill, they experienced, after their encounter, of course, they experienced poltergeist phenomena inside their home.
Yeah.
They haven't before. And I didn't know that. I know the case. I heard of the case, of course, and I know what happened, but I never knew that they experienced poltergeist activity in their home afterwards. That's a very interesting fact.
Maybe by them being abducted or seeing the UFOs or whatever happens, is it opens us up to that, where, like we were talking earlier about our minds, maybe by that happening opens us up more to that, and either spirit says, hey, they know now, or the stuff was there before but we just never noticed it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there's something inside our brain we need to unlock, and then we're able to do crazy things.
Yeah.
Even, I think telepathy might be a thing, or has been a thing in the past. I think that people back then, long ago, were able to communicate with telepathy.
Yeah, I mean, we know that our attention spans are getting a lot shorter, and two, just like our eyes, our depth of field, which is a photography term, to where it's the point in the photo where it's in focus, but our depth of field is shrinking, because, before, when our ancestors, they had to see a lot farther away to see danger coming or whatever. And now our depth of field is like 2 feet in front of us, because we're always looking at screens and all that.
Yeah, absolutely right. Imagine all these animals out there, they can sense an earthquake or a big fire like days ago sometimes, and they leave the forest, they run away or fly away, and we have no sense for that anymore.
So maybe our minds are the same way, where we're not picking up on this stuff as much as we should, or as much as we can, until something happens where it unlocks that in our brain, and now we're able to see stuff. And maybe that's why we see ghosts now, or see the UFOs more, or see more Bigfoots or whatever.
Yeah, I think all those animals, of course, they are still connected to nature, to Mother Nature, call her Mother Nature. We don't. We not anymore. We, at some point in time, we left the path. We went another direction, and we put our trust in electronic devices,
Yeah,
and technology, and we disconnected from nature. And I think we're not able to pick up the frequency anymore. And I think it's all about frequency. I talk a lot about frequencies in my podcast, also in the German podcast. And a good example, I've said it before, there's this Austrian researcher. He's a good friend of mine, and he researches frequencies in these ancient resonance chambers he found in Austria. And there's a main chamber, and there are tubes carved in the rock, and they lead to other smaller chambers. And if you sit in the main chamber and produce some kind of tone, like throat singing or a deep tone with a guitar or something else, it produces such a crazy frequency, you almost can't stand it. And I believe it. And those chambers, They had no other use. They were built for exactly that purpose. I'm 100% sure. But because the way they are built, it makes no sense to store things in it or hide in it. It just makes no sense. But if you produce these tones inside these chambers, man, it's crazy. It's a crazy feeling sitting inside these chambers.
Sound is the universal mechanism of energy. Energy vibrates, sound vibrates. That's why we use music in that. And going back to Bigfoot, one of the stories I heard from a gentleman, we actually had a garage sale one time here, and a gentleman stopped by and said that he lived about, I'd say, 3 miles north of me, and he had a Bigfoot encounter. And he said that his friend actually was frozen. And he had to, when he realized he didn't run away, he went back and shook him. And it was almost like Bigfoot put a trance on him. Okay. And I've heard other stories about that too. And that made me think, okay, what about what's called infrasound? That when we go and do our paranormal investigations, we always do a baseline of the building, and we found that infrasound is a very important thing in ghost hunting, because you could have a ceiling fan that's making a sound that'll make people think there's ghosts in the house. And you can't hear it, but the thing's making a noise. But with Bigfoot, we know that mammals send out infrasound like whales do. A lot of your big animals like buffalo, elephants, whales, they all send out infrasound to communicate with each other. And how do we know that Bigfoot's not doing that to communicate with each other? And how do we know that he can't send out those vibrations that will actually make you freeze or whatever? Yeah. I'm not saying it's magic where he's like freezing you and you're like stiff, but maybe that sound is enough to scare you enough where, you panic and freeze. We don't know that, and we know that if you're going out looking for Bigfoot, they're going to know you're there a lot earlier than what you know that they're there. It's just like dogs or any animal in the woods. They know you're there before you know they're around.
Yes.
And how do we know that they're not communicating with each other through sound?
It has nothing to do with magic.
No.
Because you mentioned magic, nothing to do with magic. Could be the most normal thing in the world back then, or animals right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. But we're running out of time here.
All right.
And it was very interesting talking to you about all these exciting topics, man. And I hope we can meet again and continue our talk, because it was very interesting. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't stay on one topic. It's like I'm thinking all this stuff. But yeah, there's so much we could talk. We could spend hours talking, and the listener would be like, all right, get over it already, but yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed it. And it was great meeting you finally, being able to come on the show.
You too. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. But before we wrap it up for today, please let listeners know where they can find you and what else is important.
Yeah. Our show, the 222 Paranormal Podcast, is available wherever you get your podcast from. If I want to send you anywhere, I want to send you to this week's show. One of our good friends and one of the first people we interviewed, Steve Ward, is our guest this week. And if you're listening or watching this later, you can always go back and look. But he's just a wealth of knowledge. I love just sitting and listening to him talk. But that's a great show. We have tons of great shows. Like I say, you can find them anywhere you get your podcasts from. If you want, you can go up to our website, 222paranormal.com. There's links all over there. But basically, anywhere you get your podcast from. I am working on the YouTube channel. It's not that great right now, but I'm going to work on putting some more stuff up there. But like I said, the best place is just go to our website, 222paranormal.com, and go from there.
Okay, I will put a link in the description, of course. Thank you again, and please, Joe, stay with me for 2 more minutes, okay?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thank you.